from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Summer is in full swing, and honestly, who doesn't love a little fun in the sun? But keeping our kids' skin safe from those harmful UV rays takes diligence. So let's talk about sunscreen and other protection.
Even if you've reapplied, if you're out in the bright sun and you haven't had any breaks, you haven't been in the shade, at some point you're going to burn. So I think a lot of people have this unrealistic expectation that sunscreen is something that can protect you indefinitely.
Welcome to Healthy Children, the podcast for parents from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho-Sanchez. I'm a pediatrician and a mama figuring it out. This is a judgment-free space where all questions are good questions, and the answers will hopefully be even better. Let's get started. Joining me today is Dr. Terese Wright. She is Chief of Pediatric Dermatology at Le Bonheur Children's Hospital and professor at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center. She's also chair of the AAP section on dermatology. Welcome, Terese.
Hello. Thank you for having me today.
We're so excited you joined us. Terese, summer is upon us, and I want to start with a quick 101 on sun protection. The question that my patients ask me the most, and the question that my mom friends have sent in our group chat, is what should we look for in a sunscreen? We're getting right to it, Terese. To be specific, what are the key ingredients that we're looking for?
Right. So in terms of ingredients, it's important to understand that there are two broad classes of ingredients that you will see in sunscreen. And one is a class of physical blockers. So we're primarily talking about zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. And then the other class is chemical blockers. And there are a lot more of those, but those are things like oxybenzone, avobenzone, octinoxate, to name a few, but there are a lot of those.
I have to tell you, it wasn't until I became a pediatrician that I started learning more about all of these things. So for the parents out there that are like, all of that sounds like a lot, what am I supposed to look for? What would you say?
Right. So as a pediatric dermatologist, in general, I recommend looking for products that contain the physical blocking agents. So you want your active ingredients to be zinc oxide and or titanium dioxide. That's because they've been around for a really long time. They have a great safety profile. They are much less likely to cause any irritation or allergic reaction on the skin. And they're also ones where we have not had safety concerns. We've had safety concerns in the last few years over some of the chemical blocking ingredients. The chemical blockers are also ones where there have been concerns about environmental issues. So you really can't go wrong if you stick with the physical blocking agents. So I recommend that. Zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. And then the other things that you want to look for, you want to look for an SPF of at least 30. So technically, I think the AAP recommends a minimum of an SPF of 15, but the American Academy of Dermatology and pediatric dermatologists recommend a minimum of SPF 30. That's because when you go from a 15 to a 30, you increase your UVB protection from 93% to 97%. So an SPF of 30 should block about 97% of UVB rays, and those are the ones that are most responsible for sunburns. Once you get above an SPF of 30, you're not getting that much more protection. When you go from like 30 to 50, you're going up by maybe 1% to like 98%. But an SPF of 30 gives you good UVB protection. The other things are, I would look for a product that's fragrance-free. Again, that's to avoid ingredients that can cause irritation on sensitive skin of kids. You also want to look for a product that has broad spectrum protection. So it should say broad spectrum, which means it's going to protect from UVA and UVB radiation. And you want a product that says that it is sweat and water resistant. There's no such thing as a waterproof sunscreen, but you should look for something that's at least water resistant.
In our house, I have a 2.5-year-old, going to be 3 soonish. We got an SPF 50 because I figured why not, but I'm learning from you that it doesn't give me that much more protection. We looked for a zinc oxide based. We also looked for sensitive skin, the broad protection, and it does say, I'm happy to report, water resistant. As I understand it, looking for that zinc oxide or titanium dioxide, if that's what parents at home choose and that's their preference and brands and ingredients, is actually also better for the sensitive skin itself. My little guy has eczema. He has atopic dermatitis, as we call it. And I have to tell you, it's been really good for his skin. He was lathered in it all last summer. We're doing the same this summer. It's been really good. The ingredient itself has been really good for him. Is that sort of what's known about zinc oxide and titanium dioxide for sensitive skin?
I mean, I think probably, those are ingredients that have been around a long time and they're really common in diaper barrier pastes. That's what's going to be in like your classic, like Desitin, like the thicker white barrier paste. So what you're probably seeing is like that it's just a really good barrier protection, for the skin. Although I will say it's not something that I typically recommend as like an emollient for all the kids I see with atopic dermatitis. But I do sometimes see parents using those sometimes and they can feel that they're somewhat helpful. So I think, it's probably just more like it's giving it a good barrier and protecting from like irritants in the environment. And also those are good, like they lock in moisture really well. So that may be why you're seeing that your child's skin, who has atopic dermatitis seems to actually benefit from those ingredients in the sunscreen.
Amazing. And I'll say, just to be super clear, we don't replace our moisturizer with that. We add it on top. But that's been really, really helpful. Now, Terese, are there any ingredients, as we're talking and going down the list of ingredients, that we should avoid when it comes to sunscreens?
Well, as I said, there's a long list of chemical blockers. And, I think in general, I just recommend avoiding them because there have been safety concerns. Number one, the chemical blocker ingredients are a little bit more common in spray sunscreens. And spray sunscreens in general aren't necessarily bad, but there have been concerns about the potential for kids to inhale those. So if parents are going to use them in general, we recommend spraying them into your hands first and then applying them to the skin. Or certainly if you have an older child, making sure that they're holding their breath, while you're spraying around them and not directly spraying their face, but spraying into your hand. And, I think it's because years ago, like it was hard for them to figure out how to put zinc oxide or titanium dioxide, which have these bigger particles, into a formulation that could be applied as a spray. More recently, though, they've been able to get those into finer and finer particles, and there are spray products that contain physical blockers. So you now do have that option. But again, you have to be mindful if you're going to be spraying something, you definitely don't want to be spraying it in a way that the child can inhale it, which could potentially irritate the airways. The other thing is, a few years ago, there was a big report which showed that some of these chemical sunscreen ingredients could actually be found in the bloodstream. So there's obviously some level of absorption and, it's not really known whether that's really a health or safety risk. So the conclusion was they really needed to do more studies, and I haven't really heard any more information on that. But, if you're a parent and you have those concerns, it's easy to just avoid those. Some of those are also the ones where there have been concerns about harm to the barrier reef and other environmental concerns. So, and I'm not knocking all chemical ingredients for every person because, as an adult, I do use some sunscreen that has some of those. They do have their advantages and they do have some benefits. But when we're talking about kids, I see so many kids with eczema who have other conditions. And in general, they tend to have really sensitive skin. So, it's just when you have a choice to avoid the things that may cause a problem, then that's usually what we recommend.
Yeah, definitely. Avoid the problem altogether. And that was going to be my other question about the environment. And it sounds like it's really been the chemical blockers that have been shown to cause damage also to the environment, which we should care about and we should teach our children to care about.
Right.
Terese, now when it comes to teens, first of all, it's so hard to get teens to wear sunscreen. That's what I have found in my practice. Mine is still really little. My little guy's still really little, so I don't have real world experience with teens yet. But in my practice, I have a really tough time getting teens to wear their sunscreen. Do you experience the same? And what are some tips there for parents of teens to get them to wear their sunscreen?
Yes, definitely. I do think it can be difficult to get teenagers to wear sunscreen consistently. I think, when they see me, I just really nag them. I talk to them about how it's important now because as kids and teenagers spend a lot more time outside. So that's where we get a significant percentage of our lifetime sun exposure, which is going to potentially increase our risk of skin cancers as we age, and also is what causes the signs of aging of the skin, the wrinkles and the spots and all that good stuff too. So I think, reminding them of those things, that when you're young is a time to really pay attention and try to really take good care of your skin so they can be healthy and look good for as long as possible. But also reminding them to use products that are oil-free, particularly for the face, because if they're prone to acne, we don't want them using heavier creams or things that could promote clogging of the pores. So they need to look for something that's oil-free. There are also some good, particularly for the face, there's some good sunscreens that come as a powder, which they can apply with like a little brush. So particularly like the girls who maybe wear makeup, some of those are a little bit tinted. So those could be a good option too. But otherwise, it's kind of all the same things in terms of what to look for and how to use it, and being consistent, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah. And I think, we can thank TikTok for what I'm about to say, but it does seem like teens are, especially girls, but also boys, really into good skincare these days. It doesn't always, in my experience, translate to sunscreen, but it translates more to like routines that they like to do. So really just trying to tie it to that routine that they're already establishing has been helpful sometimes for me. What is one thing, I want to ask you about additional layers of protection, but what is one thing that you find people still don't understand about sunscreen?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing is not realizing that there is no sunscreen that can protect you from direct sunlight indefinitely. Even if you are using sunscreen properly, putting it on, using enough, reapplying if you're outside, if you're in the water or something, you can still get a sunburn. People come in and they say, oh, the kid had a sunburn, and they'll say, but I don't know what happened because we have this sunscreen and I was putting it on and I was reapplying it. But in reality, that sunscreen is only going to protect you for a limited amount of time. That number, that SPF 30 or SPF 50, what that means is you can multiply the number of minutes that it would ordinarily take you to burn. So let's say you're a really fair person who would burn in 10 minutes with no sunscreen and no sun protection. If you're using an SPF 30 and you're applying it properly, that should theoretically give you 300 minutes before you burn. But that's it. Even if you've reapplied, if you're out in the bright sun and you haven't had any breaks, you haven't been in the shade, at some point you're going to burn. So I think a lot of people have this unrealistic expectation that sunscreen is something that can protect you indefinitely. And so you can just stay out in the sun as long as you have it on or you're putting it on.
That's so interesting, Terese. And I've definitely heard oh my gosh, I burned, but I was wearing sunscreen. And it's definitely that realization that, it's only going to protect you for so long. You really need to get in the shade and take some breaks.
Right.
Let's go back for a second because I just remembered something that I'm really curious to get your take on. I've been hearing more of my patients getting into this sunless tanners. They want to look tan, but they're starting to realize that the sun is not the best thing for them.
Right.
So they're going to the sunless options to get a tan. What do you say to those people and families that are interested in doing this?
So I assume you're talking about spray tans and other products that you can buy over the counter that give you that tan. Yeah, well, I certainly think that's better than trying to get a tan. Definitely never, ever go to tanning beds and never, ever be outside in the sun deliberately trying to get a tan. That's probably one of the most important things about protecting your skin from the sun. So I think that sunless tanners in general are okay. They have different ingredients, and you have to be mindful that you might be sensitive to some of these products. In general, we're not talking about toddlers and very young children. We're talking about teenagers. Right. The older you get, usually the little bit less sensitive your skin tends to become. So I certainly think that's okay. I've seen a lot of teenagers getting spray tans. For the most part, one of the ingredients I know that's common is really just kind of a form of a sugar that turns color when it kind of reacts on the skin. So I don't think there's a whole lot of in-depth studies, at least that I'm aware of, with terms of risks of those. Same thing if you're getting spray tan, though, definitely you want to be mindful about not inhaling the aerosol with chemical ingredients in it. But I do think in general, they are a safer option.
So interesting. I did not know that about a form of a sugar being one of the ingredients. So interesting. Terese, we've been talking, all about sunscreen and sun protection. But of course, sunscreen's only one layer. There's many layers that we use when it comes to sun protection. Please remind us what some of the other layers are for us parents.
Okay. Yeah. So number one, which I already mentioned, is don't deliberately tan. Don't be out there trying to get a tan. Never, ever go to tanning beds. Those are definitely a no-no, very bad for your skin. The second thing is you want to be in the shade sometimes and as much as possible. So try to be in an area where you have the opportunity to get into shade, or if you're at the beach, have an umbrella or some other kind of sunshade structure so that you can take breaks from the bright sun. Also, best if you can, try to avoid those brightest hours of the day, which tends to be definitely between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., although depending on where you live in the world, could certainly be extended from 10 a.m. or even a little earlier up to 4 p.m. So if you can do activities before that or later than that, that's good too. Wear protective clothing, in addition to your sunscreen, wear protective clothing. So that means rash guards, clothing specifically made to filter out UV rays of the sun. There are many good options on the market now. They have become more affordable. They can be a little bit of an investment, but I think they're worth it. Also a hat, preferably a hat with a wide brim that goes all the way around to protect your face, but also your ears and your neck. Not just a baseball cap, which is better than nothing, but it doesn't really protect your ears and your neck very well. And sunglasses too, and particularly people with very lightly colored eyes, sunglasses are super, super important. So those are the other things to keep in mind.
Terese, one other thing or challenge, I should say, that I hear from my teenage patients is that applying sunscreen to their face makes them look pasty or like ghosts. What should they be looking for in a product so that they don't look like that?
And then that can definitely be a problem, particularly with the products that do contain zinc oxide and titanium dioxide, and particularly in the past. But now we have newer generations of products where they've been able to make the particles of those ingredients very, very fine. So I would look for something that's specifically for the face. There are some brands that actually say they're invisible and become invisible on all skin tones. So they'll rub in well and not look white or pasty or leave kind of like even a purplish hue sometimes. And the other word to look for is micronized or microionized. So that tells you like the particles are really, really fine.
Terese, I love that. And I will pay more attention even when I'm buying sunscreen for myself to look for that. And one thing you just mentioned in that I think is important to talk about is the need for sunscreen across different skin complexions. I am here in New York City. I care for mostly Latino families. And there's still this misconception out there that because of their darker skin, they don't need sunscreen or not as much sunscreen. What do you say as a pediatric dermatologist to that?
Right. Well, I say everyone needs sunscreen and everyone can get a sunburn regardless of how much natural pigment they have in their skin. Now, certainly a person with very, very pale skin is probably going to burn much more quickly than someone who has more pigment in their skin because that pigment does give you some natural protection. However, it's not complete protection. And again, the amount of sun exposure that you're getting is going to be cumulative over time. People with brown and darker skin tones are still at risk for skin cancer. They're still at risk for the damage that causes changes in the skin that contribute to the appearance of aging as well. So it is really important for everybody to be mindful and to use sunscreen. And I tell my patients, even the ones I see who look like they can tan very easily, the ones who have olive and light brown complexions who say, yeah, I don't use it because I never burn. I just get tan. I say tan skin is damaged skin, and you want to limit tanning as much as possible. So you don't want to deliberately tan. And even if you're someone who gets a little bit of color when you are using sunscreen and using it regularly and properly, that can happen. But it's still important that you're paying attention to that and you're trying to limit that as much as possible. You still want to protect yourself from excess sun exposure because over time, that will ensure that you decrease your risk of skin cancer.
Tan skin is damaged skin. I'm going to use that one, Teresa. Thank you for that.
Yep, you're welcome. That's true.
Teresa, we try our best as parents, but every summer, unfortunately, I have parents who call the office because their child has a bad sunburn. And this can happen, to babies all the way through teens. We see it all. I advise them to take ibuprofen for pain, and if it's really bad, to come in so we can see them. But I'm curious what a pediatric dermatologist would advise in these situations.
Right. Well, I would give similar advice. So I think if it's mild, if there's just some pink or red skin that's a little bit tender, pain relievers, over-the-counter pain relievers, like you said, cool compresses can be helpful. There's some cooling lotions you can buy over the counter that I think are safe. Most of them contain menthol, so they give you that sort of cooling sensation on the skin. So those are okay to try. If they have blisters, on the skin, or they're really feeling unwell, having like fever, nausea, vomiting, chills, those kind of symptoms, and they should definitely be seen by the pediatrician or in an emergency department to be evaluated.
Yeah, and hopefully it won't happen to anyone listening today, but you never know. We're parents. We're juggling a lot. Teresa, last but not least, give us your go-to tips. Your parenting prescription is what we like to call this when it comes to sun protection.
Right. So we've already talked about what to look for in a sunscreen. So I would say physical blocker, SPF at least 30. I typically prefer a cream or lotion, especially for that first application, so you can really get a good layer on the skin. Remember, you're only going to get the level of protection that the product advertises if you're using enough. An average adult should be using at least 1 ounce of sunscreen to cover their body. So you kind of have to extrapolate from that to like a smaller size body, but you need to be using enough product, and also the broad spectrum protection and the water resistant. And then the other thing is you want to put it on at least 15 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes before going outside. So again, if you can get that really good layer on so you don't miss edges and places by the swimsuit, then that's really good. And then make sure that you're reapplying at least every 2 hours or more often if they're really sweating heavily or swimming and getting in the water, so that you keep a good layer of protection on.
There you have it. I love those, Teresa. Thank you so much, Dr. Terese Wright, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you at home for joining us. If you like the Healthy Children podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and help us spread the word. Follow Healthy Children on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Healthy Children AAP, and be sure to visit healthychildren.org, the parenting website of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Healthy Children is a production of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our creative team includes
Ann Johnsos,
Doug Nagel,
Susan Stevens-Martin,
Laura Alessio,
Jackie Ortega,
Mary Claire Walsh,
Hannah Weston,
Kathy Jewell,
Catherine Beard,
and Garrett Brown.
And our theme music was composed by Doug Nagel. We'll be back next week. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho-Sanchez. Thanks for listening.